The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Right. Welcome everybody to the third webinar in the Pan-Pacific Safe Communities Network webinar series for this year. My name is Tracy Earle, and together with my colleague Tanya Peters, we are your hosts today. Tanya and myself are from the Safe Communities Foundation in New Zealand, and I'd also like to thank our Australian colleagues, Megan Brotherton and Barbara Minosa, for organising one of our presenters today. Before we get on with the presentations, I'd just like to go through a few housekeeping matters. We will have time for questions after each speaker, and we'd like this to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions. Each of you will have access to a GoToWebinar control panel on your screen, and it'd be great if you could familiarise yourself with its features. If you are having any problems, if you send us a message via the control panel, and we'll endeavour to resolve that issue. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, type your question in the question area on the control panel on your screen. Or you may wish to put up your hand. To do this, click on the yellow hand on your control panel. At the end of each presentation, depending on the time available, they'll try and answer the questions. If your question isn't answered, the presenters will provide an email address at the end of their session for you to correspond with them personally. This webinar will be recorded and is available for viewing early next week through our websites. One other thing before we get started, just a reminder that the second presentation today includes watching a video clip from YouTube. I've sent out that link by email this morning with instructions. If you have not received the instructions or the link, or you're having an issue, please send us a message via the control panel with your email address and we'll resend it out to you. Thanks for bearing with us on the workaround with this video, but fortunately our GoToWebinar setup doesn't allow us to play video through the webinar, so we had to do the workaround. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters. We have two presentations today. Our first presenters are from the Mental Health Foundation of New Zealand. Jono Silu has a background in health promotion and education, specialising in sexual health, sexual violence prevention, sexuality and gender identity, mental health and decolonisation. He has a Masters of Applied Social Work and currently works as a community engagement and health promotion specialist in workplace mental wellbeing at the Mental Health Foundation. Jono's colleague Virginia coordinates the Mental Health Foundation Suicide Bereavement Service and is on the Community Engagement Health Promotion team. She contributes to the Foundation's work in the area of suicide prevention. Virginia has had experience of suicide loss, and through this she's learned the value of peer support and post-vention prevention. Virginia has a background in qualifications in education and counselling. So today, Jenny and Virginia are going to share with us mental health and wellbeing in workplace settings. So I'll just make... All right, thanks, Jono.
Cool.
I can see your screen.
There we go. Sorry, technical difficulties.
We'll get there.
So yeah,
hello.
Thanks for that, Tracy. So my name's Jono. I work here at the Mental Health Foundation. There's a whole lot of background that was just given to you, but in terms of who I am and where I'm from, I'm half Samoan, half European, born and bred out in West Auckland. And yeah, I have a background generally in the health promotion space.
Hey, my name is Virginia, and yeah, I'm Suicide Bereavement Service Coordinator here at the Mental Health Foundation. I'm a born and bred Aucklander, and passionate about mental health and passionate about yeah, life, you know. Anyway.
Cool. So this is our first time ever doing a webinar, and sorry if we're a little bit kind of lost at times, just trying to figure out new technology, and but hopefully this is useful for you all. So as we said, Virginia and I both work for the Mental Health Foundation, and our foundation's vision is for a society where all people flourish. In terms of the work that we do, it's quite broad and quite varied. For the most part, we work in this workplace space, school-based settings, and with suicide prevention stuff. And included in that is the suicide bereavement support. Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. The foundation, contrary to popular belief, the Mental Health Foundation is a not-for-profit, non-government organisation, and we have been around for 40-odd years, since the kind of late 70s, early 80s, and the mission has always been around creating a society where people can flourish and live regardless of whether you have a diagnosis, whether you don't have a diagnosis, if you've experienced distress or if you've not. The core part of our work, though, is health promotion. So lots of people think that we do stuff around clinical services. We don't provide clinical services, and we're not connected to clinical services. But the work that we do is around resourcing and giving information to the population.
So not a frontline service, but we're more resourcing the front line.
Yeah. Yes, that's cool. So we talk a lot. We thought we'd start around the language, and many of you probably know a lot about or have heard lots of different terms around mental health. But we thought it was a really good idea for us to start with the language that we as the Mental Health Foundation tend to use. So often you hear things like mental health, mental well-being, mental illness, mental distress, poor mental health, good mental health. But what we've found over the years is that there's still lots of not too sure what that means. So I guess when we talk about mental health, we tend to go to the World Health Organization's definition, where it talks about mental health as being a resource that everyone has. So much like physical health, mental health is just part of who you are. If we think about Sumason Jury's Te Wharekapa Whā model, it's one of the walls within that house that creates our entire person, our entire well-being. For mental well-being, that's how, there's a big definition for it. It's about a paragraph long, and you can find all that information on our website. We've got a paper that talks through how we define those terms. But in essence, mental well-being talks about how a person relates to external factors. So what can keep me being well, and conversely, what sort of things can impact on me feeling well. So that's, like I said, the external, it might be stress, it might be pressures, could be work, could be kids, all of those sorts of things, including societal pressures or societal attitudes. How can that create pressure on a person or uplift who they are? Finally, around mental illness, for us, mental illness, we talk about that as when somebody actually has a diagnosis. So some of you may have seen the Keats model of mental well-being. It's a dual continuum. Often the traditional view is when does somebody have symptoms of a mental illness, of a diagnosable mental illness, or do they not have it? We add in, if you think of it like a line, the other continuum is the well-being continuum. So is somebody flourishing or somebody languishing? Because we know that just because somebody has a diagnosis, it doesn't actually tell you much about who they are and what their well-being looks like. So you may be diagnosed, but in a really great space and doing well, feeling good, functioning well. So we don't talk about that person as being in mental distress, but rather talk about that person as cool, they've got a diagnosed mental illness, but that doesn't tell us anything about who they are. Anything else you want to say to that, Virginia?
No, yeah, great.
Cool.
So it's quite a holistic model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Resilience. Now.
Often disputed term.
Yeah. when we start moving into the workplace space, resilience is one of those words that tends to pop up a lot. How do we build resilience? How do we create resilience in our workers? One thing that we've found a lot is that in our engagement with workplaces, often what pops up is how we're going through a restructure. How do we implement a resilience program so that we can support our workers?
And the thing is, resilience isn't a sticking plaster.
Yeah.
And it's a process that, you know, we engage with daily, and mindful practice, I guess, you know, in that sense that it's a movable feast, right? Our resilience, it can go up, it can go down in relation to whatever's going on for us.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess in short, the way that we tend to talk about resilience here at the Foundation is that resilience is your ability to bounce back, and there are protective factors and risk factors, things that can build that ability to bounce back from not so great situations, and things that can create or make situations even worse for people. What we tend to do, though, is actually ask people to think about what does that term mean to them? How could they talk about it? How could they define it? And I'd encourage everyone on this webinar to go through that process. How do you define resilience? Because a lot of the time what we hear is that it's becoming a buzzword for people, and it is a scapegoat for a lot of people for how do we get out of taking responsibility for other people's well-being. Whereas we encourage and foster supportive and inclusive communities and environments.
Yeah, I mean, part of being in community is, while you're responsible for your own resilience, I mean, we're always responsible for ourselves, but, you know, you have to think about how what you does impacts on other people and how that can impact on their resilience, especially in the workplace. And if we're talking redundancy or some of those awkward workplace processes that can take place, what is that like for people, actually?
I think at this point it's also really important for us to note that it's not about us. Us defining stuff is just to give everyone kind of a baseline of where we talk about things here at the Foundation. But we totally encourage people to go and explore for themselves what do those terms and phrases mean. Because the one thing, as somebody working in workplace wellbeing, one of the things I hear constantly from workplaces is that they're not sure what the words mean. They don't really get it. So for us, we think we try and take people on a little bit of a journey around figuring out what those words mean, looking at some of the evidence for the definitions of things like mental illness, mental health, mental wellbeing, but then take that into more practical steps. That's cool. We know what those words mean, but how do we now actually do things and uplift and create supportive environments? And
give it your own cultural meaning. So, you know, what does it mean for you, for your whānau, for your people, for,
I think for us that comes from a place of we don't claim to be experts in this space. We're experts in the things that in our own experiences, but in much the same way. And we have some information about mental health and well-being. We can look at what the research says. We can hear what people are saying. But often what we talk about is how do people take that information and become experts in their own communities, in their own workplaces, in their own family environment, so that it becomes information that's then relevant to them, that they're self-determined, really. Cool. Oh, it's me again. So, at workplace wellbeing here at the Mental Health Foundation, we've got a whole bunch of tools and resources that are freely available, all on our website. You'll see there are 5 things we've got listed. The first 3 are tools and resources. So, Open Minds, which talks more about, Open Minds talks more about the distress end of that spectrum. When people aren't in great spaces, how do we create that supportive environment? How do we open conversations? How do we, even basic tools of what words do you say if you've got someone who walks into your office and you're the manager and then they break down crying? How do we offer them support, and where can we refer on to? There are also tools in there that talk about how do we support somebody who has been through pretty decent amount of distress. How do we support them coming back to work? The 5 Ways Toolkit. So we base all of our work around the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which is an evidence-based, they're not the only 5 ways, they are 5 ways that we know from evidence from the UK. The New Economics Foundation did that research. And the 5 ways talk about things that are simple things that people can do in their own lives to help to maintain their well-being or to help pick them up when they're not feeling so great. We do know that when somebody is in severe distress, though, they're not super effective, and often it can be a little bit condescending to say, you know, let's just go for a walk when somebody's not feeling great, but has been not great for a sustained amount of time. But that toolkit is how can we apply those 5 ways within a workplace context. It's got a whole bunch of matrices that people can use to do policy and process development. There are activities that can be done that are short and easy. There's all sorts of stuff in there, so I'd encourage you to go and have a look. We've also got our Working Well stuff, which we've got 2 workshops now that are Train the Trainer, and we're welcome to pick them up, download all the materials and run with them. We encourage people to do that because what people often don't know about the Mental Health Foundation is that there are a grand total of 2 of us in the health promotion team that work on wellbeing for all of Aotearoa. So we encourage people to take the information that we've got and make it relevant for their workplaces. The other 2 there are the Mental Health Awareness Week, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and it's centered around World Mental Health Day. That is a campaign, and we've got a whole bunch of resources you're welcome to go and download. And we'd encourage you to take part in Mental Health Awareness Week as well for 2018. The final one there is Pink Shirt Day. So this year, Pink Shirt Day expanded into workplace spaces, and Pink Shirt Day is all about anti-bullying messaging. But yeah.
Fantastic. These are our suicide prevention resources. So we've got the Te Hei Māori Ora, fantastic, beautiful, beautiful resource. It is created for Māori audience, however, you know, anyone can use it. The messaging in it is beautiful and again, evidence-based. So really anyone can use it. Are you worried someone is thinking of suicide? It's a great little resource for how to have the conversation, because often, you know, with suicide, that's the scariest thing. If you're trying to support someone else, how do you have that conversation? So that resource just gives you some really good basic ideas about how to do that. It felt like it was all too much. This resource is for someone who may have had a suicide attempt and they're trying to work through that to come forward into the light. And that resource, actually, it's amazing. You can see it's got that sort of moody, dark cover. It was because we did a lot of co-design around the resource, speaking to people who had had lived experience of trying to take their own life, and people talked about it as being like in a dark place. And as they started to come out of that space, it was like coming into the light. So you'll see in the resource, you work through and the colours get lighter and brighter until you're in the sunrise. So that idea of coming into the light as you find hope. It also includes that resource safety plan. So there's a pull-out safety plan in the back, and you can fill in your own information to create your own safety plan. What happens now, another good little resource for if somebody has had a suicide attempt. It's just straightforward, it's short, but it just gives you some good what next pointers, especially helpful if you're supporting somebody after a suicide loss. And then that yellowy colour one, Connecting Through Corridor, it's one of our new resources. It's to support adults, so parents, caregivers, teachers, counsellors who may be having conversations with youth around suicide. We've got some videos being made shortly to go with that as well. So that's an expanding suite of resources there to support around how to have those important conversations. These are our after a suicide resources. So in the top corner, after a suicide, it's a Ministry of Health website that we developed for the Ministry of Health, and it's got basic practical information for after a suicide. For example, what is the coroner's process? What are some ways you can look after yourself? Comment or no comment if somebody is sharing their story of suicide loss in the media. Again, we developed that by talking to people who had gone through that experience of being bereaved by suicide and sharing their story, and ask them, well, what advice would you give to someone else in that same position? So the resource doesn't tell someone how to think or what to do, it just gives you some pointers, some for and against for sharing your story, or some things to consider. And you can make up your own mind what you do. The little postcard there, it directs people to the After a Suicide website, and on the flip side it actually has some self-care information for after a suicide. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, we could have probably filled a book, but it's just something to get started. And if you are supporting someone after a suicide, or someone you're trying to help, family, whānau, friends, those little self-care tips are a really good little place to start a conversation with someone. It's like all our resources, you know, they can't save a life, but they're a starting point for how to have a conversation. The red cover there, that's our guidelines for support groups for suicide loss. They're really quite handy. They were developed, again, talking to people around Aotearoa, New Zealand, who run support groups for suicide loss. How do they do that? What's involved? They're flexible guidelines, so you can take them and adapt them to whatever your situation is. So you can kind of mix it up a little. They're not prescriptive or didactic. They're not, but they're very useful. And to go along with that work, we've run a couple of workshops. We have one in Auckland and one in Wellington around how to run a support group for suicide loss. We also have a little series of online videos on YouTube about how to run a support group for suicide loss. And the nice thing about these videos is, again, it features for people who actually run suicide support groups, talking about what they do, what that's like, and how that works. And you can find these on our Mental Health Foundation website.
Cool. So, for us, I guess the big question is why? We've noted, and it's great that that y'all are looking at the workplace wellbeing stuff, but what we've also seen is that there's a hell of a lot more interest. We get approximately 2 to 3 workplaces a day getting in contact with us here at the Foundation, asking for us to come and help them with mental health stuff. And so Virginia and I both sat down and said, well, why? What's some of the stuff that's really pushing this conversation forward? And there were 2 main things, really. The changes in the social context and the statistics that are becoming a lot more commonly talked about, especially in media spaces. So we hear a lot more of this when the suicide stats get announced by the coroner. We hear a lot more about that. It becomes a conversation. It's in our media. Things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they've really picked up that drive towards making this conversation an important and vital part of just generally people's lives, which we think is great. I guess also what we hope for, though, is that people have access to information, really, so that they are able to make things relevant for themselves, but also able to seek the support when they need the support, whether that's for themselves or for somebody else, like a friend, a family member, a colleague at work, etc., etc. We've noticed that there's a lot more of a humanized narrative, especially in workplaces. I've heard from a lot of corporates that we've spoken to in the process of developing more materials, that how do we move away from the baseline? Yep, making money is going to be important for us because that's how we pay our bills, that's how we pay our staff, but also we want to make sure that the workplace is somewhere where people want to work, where people enjoy coming to do their job and can have a bit of fun there as well.
And conversely, if you create that environment, you actually get workers who perform better. So
yeah,
win-win.
Totally. So I guess the other big one there is the law reform. So in 2015, there was the Mental Health at Work Act, which was changes to health and safety regulations in New Zealand. And now the law legally requires that workplaces, as part of their health and safety stuff, include mental health and well-being in that dialogue as well. What's awesome is that we've seen lots of workplaces who really want to have a good go at this rather than just tick a box exercises. In regards to stats, So, for example, the construction industry, the Building Research Association of New Zealand have just put out a research report that specifically looks at mental health in the construction industry and talks about, is there a need for this work? Is there more need for research, more need for programs? What could they look like? And why are the stats so high? So if we talk about suicide in the construction industry, construction has 6.9% of all suicides in New Zealand, and that's based on
highly represented.
Yeah, it's the highest for all industries, followed by forestry and farming. So we have a hell of a lot more kind of happening in the research space, in the stats space, in social change spaces, but also just generally as a result of society.
Increased awareness.
Yeah. So there's a hell of a lot more interest, which is great, but now it's about how do we help to resource that space. So for us, Mental Health Foundation, we work from a strengths-based perspective, and so for us it's about moving that stance from deficit to well-being, strengthening conversations, processes, policies, all of the other things around that. And we found that the best way to do that, and research supports this, is by creating culture changes in workplaces. There is some big systemic work that lots of organizations need to go through, and that's where we say, yep, there's some ways that you can reframe this rather than making it a whole new thing in your workplace. You've probably got a lot of things like policies and procedures that already strengthen well-being. So let's focus on those. The other major question that comes from managers, though, is how do I have that conversation, as I mentioned earlier? So resourcing staff with the ability to have conversations about mental health and feel confident in those conversations and know what their referral pathways are, and have that built in within their organizational processes. Those soft skills become really vital parts of starting that culture change.
Yeah, I think we talked about making this a conscious process. So often we go, oh yes, well we know what that is or that is, but actually do we? So sitting down and being consciously aware of, you know, how do you refer staff, or when do you need to refer someone, actually consciously having that conversation and actually figuring out your processes really clearly, so that once you are in a situation where you might need to support someone, you know where you're going, you know what you're doing.
Yeah, sometimes those questions are big and scary as well for a lot of organizations, especially the conversation around mental health, because people tend to go, mental health equals mental illness. I don't know how to do this is too hard. So what we try and talk about is, let's reframe what mental health means. Instead of talking about what is our policy on mental health, or how do we do mental health stuff here, rather talk about, well, what does it mean to have a good day? What do I need to have a good day? What do my colleagues need to have a good day? What are things that I enjoy doing? What creates joy for me? Those are the kinds of questions that are all in our toolkits, but also the kinds of questions that immediately give you a plan for well-being. And they're practical things that you can do in your workplace. So it might, for me, I know personally, for me to have a good day, I need to come to work and know that I can have a conversation with my colleagues. I need to be able to come to work and know that I've actually got food, because I can't really function without lunch or breakfast or dinner, especially if I'm missing all three. So if I know that I can come to work and I can shoot down the road, I can grab something that is filling but also like nutritious, that's actually really helpful for me. And it contributes to me having a good day. So those processes don't need to be anything massive or difficult, but in fact that we already have the answers. Everyone already has their own answers for what they need to strengthen well-being. It's just a case of putting it down on paper and really being, like you're saying, Virginia, conscious about that process.
And I think being responsive to the fact that different people might have different needs, and where's the flexibility for people? Yeah. That flexibility, I think, is absolutely key.
Totally.
What works for one won't necessarily work for another, but creating space in your workplace to accommodate some individuality.
Oh, and that's answers the question.
Yeah, Q&A time.
Yeah, we talk a lot, and so we thought about if you've got any questions, feel free to ask us, and we can try and work stuff in that way. But
realise you all have your own knowledge, and
totally.
You've got so much to bring. So if you've got questions, please, or things you just want to contribute and say.
Nope.
I can't see anything at the moment.
Okay.
Cool.
That's cool.
No, there's nothing immediate, but I'm sure once people have had a think about all that material you two have covered, you've covered a lot of stuff. So once people have had a think about that, I'm sure there will be some questions. So
Awesome.
do you have your email addresses on a slide? Yep.
So feel free to get in contact with either of us. So like I said, in terms of my work, I'm focused around workplace wellbeing. At the moment, I'm developing some new resources that are geared towards, so they're part of the Open Minds package, but they're geared towards specifically our construction, our manufacturing, and our forestry industries, because our current suite of resources tends to miss anybody who doesn't work within office spaces. So we thought, let's develop stuff for office spaces. And Virginia, what's suicide bereavement stuff? Any questions on that space?
Yeah, any questions in that space?
Cool. Awesome. But otherwise, thank you for listening to us, and hopefully you can enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Well, thank you very much to you both for your time and your sharing and your expertise. And as I said before, you've certainly given everybody plenty to think about, and I'm sure people will be in touch. So thank you very much. Okay, I'd now like to introduce our next presenter, Amy Milken. Amy Milken is a Health Promotion Officer at Star Health in Melbourne, Australia. She has a Master of Health Science in Health Promotion and has gained substantial experience through her volunteering work with several organisations. Amy was a project lead of the Smiles for Volunteering Work program across 2 local government areas, and she's developed an e-referral system to create greater access to community work, and is the coordinator of the Party Overdose Prevention Project and co-founder of the Seafood Good Karma Network. And as this Communities That Care Stonington coordinator, Amy works with over 30 partners across 3 key areas. These are reducing adolescent alcohol and drug use, improving school engagement, and improving family function. Amy has a passion for equity and ensuring opportunity is given to the voices less heard. Today, Amy's presentation is entitled Using a Prevention Framework to Understand and Prioritise Action in Mental Health. So just to remind our attendees, Amy will give a short presentation and then we'll introduce the video. So we've sent out the video link, YouTube link, and that will take 6 to 7 minutes to watch. And then there'll be an opportunity to ask Amy any questions. So over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Tracy, and thanks to Jono and Virginia for your presentation and insight. So my name is Amy, and today I'll be presenting on how we've used a prevention framework to prioritise community action in mental health. So today I'll highlight the prevention framework we've used in Stonington. I'll touch on our youth voice that we created and the key learnings, and as Tracy mentioned, direct you to the film that was being made. So this project's been going for 2 years, and I'll be able to provide you with a very speedy snapshot of the work we've done to date. Please do get in touch if you'd like to discuss any of our work further and if you're interested in anything else. So to give you a bit of context about where we are, so the City of Stonington is a Victorian local government area located in Melbourne's inner southeastern suburbs. So it's only about 3 k's from the CBD. So Stonington has just over 110,000 residents and around 24,000 families living in the area. The median age is around 35, and we've got about 13% of the population are children aged 0 to 14. Now, Stonington is a very affluent catchment with pockets of significant disadvantage, primarily within large public housing projects in South Yarra, Paran and down in Windsor. Stonington was highlighted by researchers from Deakin University as a pilot setting for a longitudinal trial of an evidence-based prevention framework, and that's the framework that I'll be basing my presentation off today. So what is CTC? So Communities That Care is an evidence-based community change project for reducing youth problem outcomes, including harmful substance use, low academic achievement, early school leaving, sexual risk-taking and violence. So this framework is based on a 5-phase model, and it assists communities to mobilise and align on issues affecting young people. This framework also enables communities to use evidence-based interventions to affect change on a local level. Today I'll speak to how we've used this framework to create CTC Stonington and how we've prioritised work in mental health. As Tracy highlighted, we do have over 30 partners. So these partners range from schools, family services, mental health and AOD services and local council. So CTC in Stonington began in 2016 with Star Health becoming the auspice agency and licence holder for the framework in Stonington. The first 2 phases of the CTC framework are built on preparing a community for action and setting up governing structures. We also use this time to create community awareness and bring the community together for a launch event, which is some of the photos you can see there from our basketball event. Our mission collectively is to work in partnership to improve the health and development of children, young people and families in Stonington through early intervention and prevention. In phase 3, we worked with local schools and communities to capture data through a youth survey and additional community data sets. Some of the key data that stood out to us as a partnership was around the youth alcohol use and parental supply, reporting of low school commitment and reporting of poor family functioning. We used this data and supplementary community data to build a sound understanding of the risk factors affecting young people, prioritise actions in 3 key priority areas. They are reducing youth alcohol and drug use, improving family functioning and improving school engagement. The prevalence we found in depressive symptoms and a decrease in people's ability to cope with stress as they got older were high across the catchment, and this modifiable risk factor contributes to the 3 outcome areas that we prioritised. After we'd prioritised these areas of work, we then set out to assess existing community resources and highlight strengths and gaps in current programs available in the catchment. This was to make sure that we didn't replicate anything that was existing and to value add to current things that were happening. So in phase 4, we used the findings from all of our data collection and resource mapping to create a plan of action and prioritise implementation of evidence-based interventions or those with emerging evidence, so in a space that hasn't been explored too much. So these programs endorsed work to shift the risk and protective factors just shown in the middle column there and lead to changes in the targeted priority outcome areas on the right-hand side. So I put a star against the programs we endorsed with a clear link to shifting the risk factors of ability to cope with stress and emotional control. As I said, they seem to be the undercurrent of most of our outcome areas. So we're currently in phase 5. So we're implementing and evaluating these programs. So we've got multiple partners engaged in the co-coordination and delivery of these programs, and all programs are working within different settings and domains, be it the community domain, family domain, school or individual domain. So we have programs around emotional regulation, parenting programs around emotional coaching. We have Smart Generation, which is around supply monitoring across the Stonnington catchment in local packaged liquor outlets, and also creating school awareness around delaying the first drink, and also Game Aware, which is an emerging program in the gaming space. So it's a parenting and gamers program to monitor game use. So onto our youth voice. So a little bit about how this came about. So as mentioned, we found that our data revealed risk factors that contribute to poor mental health in young people, but we also felt that our data wasn't telling us much, merely because we weren't asking the right questions within our survey or existing data sets. We really wanted to hear about young people, about what they were experiencing, and not be limited to our small data size and the biannual surveying. Although the CTC framework as it is doesn't include a youth voice component, other than the survey that is done every 2 years, we felt it was a non-negotiable to include young people. So we created the youth voice. Off the bat, these young people highlighted gaps in our data. Specifically gambling, gaming, and social media pressure came up as key themes. They also validated the data that we had collected around alcohol and drug use, mental health, violence, and bullying. We knew there was a real opportunity to work with these young people and unpack these issues. So we set out and gained funding and received $10,000 from the Alcohol and Drug Foundation's Local Drug Action Team project to help work with these young people and create change in the issues that mattered to them. So what we did with that $10,000 is we partnered with Storyscape in January of this year to work with our youth voice. They did a lot of unpacking about why they were participating in such a workshop, what issues they found important to them, and what medium is the best way to portray the issues to the wider community. And some of the key themes that came out of the workshop, you can see there are student empowerment, mental health, drawing on a different person's experience, and understanding young people as key areas of interest. From there, participants were asked to go outside in pairs and take photos of something that represented a topic they wanted to focus on without speaking to any of the other participants. And these are the images they came back with. As you can tell from these images, they all represent mental health. So what they did is they came back into the room and they had to explain what their photo represented and what that really meant to them. They then worked with Storyscape to develop a short film, as film was the medium they selected as having the most power. The film was based on mental health. They developed the whole screenplay, the script, the music, absolutely everything. They launched the film at their own event in May at a local art gallery and invited local schools, community organisations to attend. They also had a panel discussion with people from various we had a school, we had Headspace, and we had the Reach Foundation, and also one of our Youth Voice consumer representatives as well. So before you view the film, a couple of our key learnings from our prevention framework that we've used. Probably the key one is don't be limited by data. It could only tell us so much. There is really great value in giving voice to young people, and a voice that is timely. So young people change so rapidly, and it's really important to have regular input from young people. And using a prevention framework as a solid base to scaffold from, and it's okay to be innovative. So I'll hand it back to Tanya to guide you to the link, or if you've got it open on YouTube, you can view the film now.
Thank you, Amy. So if everybody would like to just click on their link and watch the YouTube video for 5 to 6 minutes, and then we'll return to the webinar for Amy to answer any questions you may have. Well, thank you for sharing that video with us, Amy. Oh,
No worries.
oh, what's that? Oh, what was that?
What is it? So hopefully everyone's viewed the film. If you do have any questions for me, this is my email, or you can type them in and ask me.
Thanks, Amy. There's a couple of questions popped up in the question box. I'll just read one out to you. It's from Joanna Phillips, and they stated that they liked the community response about saying it's a village problem, not an individual problem, and the student support there. So that's, I think, more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, definitely. I guess that speaks to the domains as well. So not just working in one setting and trying to work across multiple domains. So within the family setting through programs, within the schools, but then also the wider community, so sporting clubs, liquor outlets and things like that.
Yep. And does anyone else have any further questions for any of our panelists today? Nope, I think we're done. Well, thank you to our panelists, Jono, Virginia and Amy. We really appreciated your presentations today. And a short evaluation will pop up via email for you all to complete after the presentation. If you've got any further questions, just send them through on the chat and I can forward them to the relevant presenters. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.